I want you to imagine a, a sprawling ancient courtyard right at dawn.
Oh, setting the scene right away.
Yeah, exactly. The air is entirely still, and right in the center of this space, there are two massive parallel walls of roaring fire.
Like a literal mountain of flame.
Literally, burning so hot it actually distorts the air around it. And surrounding this inferno is an entire royal court, just standing there in this breathless, absolute silence.
Wow.
And then a prince appears. He's dressed in pure white robes, riding this restless, pitch-black horse, and he is steering that horse directly toward the flames.
It's just such an incredibly primal cinematic image.
Right.
But what makes it so gripping isn't just the spectacle of it. It raises this terrifying question that we honestly still struggle with today, which is, what do you do when human justice completely breaks down?
When the system just fails.
Exactly. When every witness might be lying, when the political system is totally corrupted, and when basic reason fails to give you the truth, how do you actually figure out what is real?
And that is the exact dilemma we are exploring today in this deep dive. We're looking at a masterful piece of writing that takes that primal image, the trial by fire, and uses it to interrogate the very concept of truth.
Yeah, it's a brilliant piece.
The source material is this fascinating blog post by Farid Novin titled Plays and Philosophy, Flames of Truth, The Trial of Sayabash. And on the surface, this is a retelling of an ancient Persian myth from Ferdowsi's epic poem, the Shahnameh.
But the author does something really brilliant here. They haven't just, adapted a historical myth. They've totally reimagined it as a philosophical tragedy.
Which is such a cool concept.
It really is. The four main characters in this royal drama aren't just your standard archetypes. Each one is explicitly written to embody the worldview of a distinct, heavy-hitting modern philosopher.
Right. We are talking about Friedrich Nietzsche, Martin Heidegger, Immanuel Kant, and Søren Kierkegaard.
Yeah.
Four massive, incredibly complex worldviews colliding over a single scandalous accusation in an ancient court.
Culminating in that literal trial by fire.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because mapping dense existential philosophy onto high-stakes royal drama requires a pretty serious inciting incident.
Yeah, you need a spark.
Exactly. And it all starts with a homecoming. Prince Siavash has just returned to his father's court after spending 7 years out in the wilderness where he was raised and trained by a legendary champion.
And he comes back not as a boy, but as this fully formed, incredibly grounded young man. And almost immediately, the Queen Sudebe, who is actually Siavash's stepmother, becomes intensely infatuated with him.
Right.
But to really understand Sudebe, we have to look through the lens of Friedrich Nietzsche. She is written as the pure embodiment of Nietzsche's will to power.
Yeah, she is definitely not playing the standard wicked stepmother trope here. She's something much more elemental. I think a lot of people misunderstand Nietzsche's will to power as just like bullying or fascism.
Totally. It gets misread constantly.
Right. But here, Sudebe views the conventional morality of the royal court. The rules, the traditions, the constant political maneuvering as a cage. She sees those rules as, slave morality.
A system built by the resentful to contain people more vital than themselves.
Exactly. She looks at Siavash and sees a fellow superior being. She sees her own intense desire not as a sin, but as proof that she's fully alive.
Yeah, for Sudebe, the ultimate expression of that vitality is creation through destruction. It's what Nietzsche would call a Dionysian excess.
She wants him to break the rules with her.
Right. She demands that Siavash transgress with her. She wants him to break the ultimate taboo, step outside the bounds of conventional morality, simply to prove that he isn't just another timid rule follower.
But Siavash rejects her. And the way he rejects her is where this narrative really elevates from, like, a soap opera into deep philosophy.
Because he doesn't use the law.
No, he doesn't panic and say, I can't do this, it's against the rules, my dad will kill me. He doesn't do that at all. Siavash speaks the language of Martin Heidegger. He operates entirely on the concept of Dasein, or being there.
Yeah, for Siavash, giving in to Sudebe would mean surrendering his authenticity. Heidegger wrote a lot about the danger of Dasein, the anonymous conformist crowd.
The pressure to just do what everyone else does.
Exactly. Siavash refuses to let the rules of the crowd define him, but crucially, he also refuses to let Sudebe's intents will dictate his existence. He tells her that living authentically means confronting his own finite existence and finding a fidelity to his own possibilities.
He's taking full ownership of his own being.
He really is.
So if we think about how people usually handle conflict, right? It's force against force. If someone comes at you with the energy of a Category 5 hurricane, your instinct is to build a massive concrete wall. You push back.
Fight fire with fire.
Exactly. But Siavash doesn't build a wall, he just turns into open sky.
Oh, I love that analogy.
Right. The hurricane is raging, but it has absolutely nothing to hit. He's essentially saying, I'm not rejecting you because of some moral code. I'm rejecting you because doing this is fundamentally incompatible with the entity that I am. It's an ontological refusal.
And that kind of absolute, unshakable clarity is the one thing Sudeba's will to power just cannot process.
She breaks her framework.
Completely. Her philosophy relies on dominating or merging with other forces. When she encounters an existence that simply refuses to be moved or manipulated, it infuriates her.
So she pivots to destruction.
Right. If he won't create his own values with her, she decides she'll use her immense will to destroy him. She literally tears her own clothing, storms into the public throne room, and loudly accuses Siavash of assaulting her.
Which is a terrifying escalation. And I think anyone who has ever dealt with toxic office politics or a fractured friend group can relate to that feeling of being falsely accused. Your first instinct is to scream the truth, right? To defend yourself.
Of course, yeah.
But Siavash goes completely silent. He refuses to defend himself at all.
Because he recognizes that in a royal court, language is inherently corrupted. It's just a tool of power.
If he speaks, people aren't going to listen for the truth.
Exactly. They're going to interpret his words based on their own political alliances and hidden agendas. He believes that in a compromised system, truth cannot be spoken. It can only be lived.
Man, that silence is powerful, but it creates a massive vacuum in the court. Because he refuses to play the whole he said, she said political game, the burden of finding the truth falls squarely on the people around him.
And it's an impossible situation.
Yeah.
The system is broken. The only witnesses are the accuser and the accused, and there is zero physical evidence.
So how do you find the truth? This brings us to the champion who raised Siavash, a man named Rustam, and Rustam's philosophical operating system is Immanuel Kant.
Yeah, Rustam steps into this chaotic vacuum and tries to anchor everything with pure logic. He relies on Kant's categorical imperative.
Which is basically the ultimate rule-based ethics.
To put it simply, yeah. Kant argued that you should only act according to rules that you would want to become universal laws for everyone.
Right.
So if you lie, you're saying everyone should lie.
Right.
Which destroys the concept of truth itself. So lying is inherently illogical.
And Rustam applies this directly to the trial. He essentially says, look, Siavash is a rational agent. He governs his life by logical maxims. The maxim of assaulting someone cannot be universalized without completely destroying the social fabric of human trust.
It's a contradiction.
Right. So therefore, a highly rational being like Siavash simply could not have committed the act. He argues it's a mathematical, logical impossibility.
And he's completely serious about this.
I have to push back on Rustam here, though. If I'm falsely accused of a horrific crime and my defense attorney stands up and says my client is very good at logic, therefore he couldn't have committed a crime, I would be terrified.
It doesn't exactly scream solid defense.
No. It feels incredibly cold. Like, does Rustam actually care about the prince as a living, breathing human being? Or is he just trying to protect his pristine logical framework? A justice system that operates purely on algebraic logic without an ounce of human empathy feels fundamentally broken to me.
Well, what's fascinating here is that you're hitting on the exact vulnerability of Kantian ethics that the author wants to expose.
Oh, really?
Yeah. For Rustam, relying on empathy is actually the most dangerous thing you can do. Emotions are subjective. They can be faked.
Yeah, I guess that's true.
I mean, look at Sudebe. She is actively weaponizing emotion and tears to manipulate the court. Rustam clings to the categorical imperative because it's supposed to be immune to manipulation. To Kant, the universal moral law is the only thing that guarantees human dignity, precisely because it doesn't care about your feelings.
But Rustam's pure logic hits a brick wall in this courtroom. Logic is basically a processing engine, right? It needs data to run.
Garbage in, garbage out, or in this case, nothing in.
Exactly. When you have premise A, which is Sudebe crying assault, and premise B, which is Siavash's absolute silence, and zero physical evidence, the logical formula just outputs an error. Reason is completely paralyzed.
Which means the burden of this impossible decision shifts again. This time to the one person who actually has the authority to issue a verdict, Siavash's father, King Kavus.
And King Kavus is such an incredible case study here, because the text doesn't just hand him a ready-made philosophy. It forces him to evolve through Søren Kierkegaard's 3 stages of existence in real time, under immense pressure.
Yeah, it's a painful evolution to watch. For his entire reign, Cabos has lived in what Kierkegaard calls the aesthetic stage.
And the aesthetic stage is essentially being the ultimate consumer of life, right? Enjoying the spectacles, the moods, the immense privileges of being a king without making any deep defining commitments. You're just kind of surfing on the surface of existence.
Exactly that. But this crisis shatters that surface. He can no longer just observe. He's forced to judge his own son and his own wife.
He has to make a choice.
Right. He desperately tries to enter Kierkegaard's second stage, the ethical stage. He wants to figure out his absolute universal duty as a monarch.
Oh, there's a catch.
A huge catch. Here's the tragic flaw of the ethical stage in this specific scenario. Ethics requires objective truth. You cannot do your duty if you do not know the facts of what happened in that room. And the objective facts are totally, permanently inaccessible to him.
So reason failed Rustam, and now facts have completely failed the king. He's trapped in this agonizing void.
Which leaves him facing radical doubt. He's suspended in the anxiety of freedom. To make a decision, Kavos realizes he has to abandon the safety of logic and ethics. He has to move into Kierkegaard's final stage, the religious stage.
This is where things get so intense.
He explicitly compares his situation to the biblical story of Abraham being asked to sacrifice his son Isaac on the mountain. He decides he must make a leap of faith into the absurd.
And I think we can all relate to that on some level. Think about the biggest, most consequential decisions in your own life. Marrying someone, deciding to have a child, moving across the world for a career change.
Really life-altering stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You can make all the pro and con lists you want. You can try to be as Kantian and logical as possible. But eventually, the spreadsheet runs out. You never have 100% of the data. At some point, you just have to leap into the dark and trust the choice.
And King Kavus takes that leap on a terrifying, monumental scale. He recognizes that human systems are completely inadequate. So he entrusts this unresolvable conflict to something beyond human manipulation. He orders the ancient trial by fire.
Here's where it gets really interesting. It's so wild that the author uses a deeply modern philosophical concept, Kierkegaard's leap of faith, to justify the most ancient, primitive justice system imaginable.
It's a brilliant juxtaposition.
The Zoroastrian priests build these massive parallel walls of wood. It's the sacred hearth fire context. Sayabash approaches, dressed completely in white to represent purity, riding that dark, restless horse.
And as the fire rages, the narrative allows us to see how each of our four distinct philosophies confronts this completely uncontrollable element.
Okay, let's break down their reactions.
Well, Rustam, the Kantian, watches with barely concealed disgust. The fire defies reason. It defies the moral law. But he accepts it only because the alternative, letting the court devolve into corrupt political warfare, is worse.
And Sudabit, our Nietzschean queen, she's genuinely unnerved for the first time because the fire is the one thing in the entire world that her will to power cannot manipulate, seduce, or dominate. It just burns. It doesn't care about her vitality.
Exactly.
Yeah.
While King Kavus totally embraces the flames. For him, the roaring fire is the physical, terrifying manifestation of his leap of faith. He has surrendered his royal authority to the absurd.
And what about Siavash? How does a person operating purely on Heidegger's concept of being face a literal wall of fire?
He faces it through the experience of Unheimlichkeit, which translates to uncanniness.
Uncanniness.
Right. It's the profound realization that you're not truly at home in the world. As Siavash rides toward the flames, the fire strips away every single social label. He's no longer a prince. He's no longer an accused man. He's no longer a son. He confronts what Heidegger calls his being toward death.
Yeah, let's quickly explain being toward death, because it sounds incredibly morbid, but it actually isn't.
Not at all.
It doesn't mean being suicidal. It means accepting your own finitude, accepting that you will end so completely that the everyday anxieties and the pressures of the crowd just evaporate.
It's actually very liberating.
Exactly. When you truly accept your own mortality, all the political maneuvering of the court becomes meaningless. You are finally free to just exist in the present moment. Siavash doesn't flinch because he has already accepted his complete existence.
And so he rides his horse directly into the vault of fire. The text describes this impossible interval where there is just the roaring of the flames and absolute silence from the crowd.
I'm holding my breath just thinking about it.
And then he emerges on the other side, completely untouched. His white clothes do not have a single scorch mark on them.
The tension in that moment is unbelievable, but Farid Novin leaves us with a really haunting question regarding Siavash's survival.
Yeah, the big why.
Right. Did Siavash survive the fire because he was factually innocent of the crime, in a legal sense? Or did he survive because, In the center of that furnace, he achieved aletheia.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, aletheia is a vital concept in Heidegger's work. We usually translate it as truth, but Heidegger meant it as unconcealment.
On concealment. Okay.
It's the event of an entity being fully, completely revealed for what it is, stripped of all hidden motives and societal masks.
So it isn't truth as a verdict on a piece of paper. It's truth as an event. The fire didn't act as a judge weighing evidence. The fire acted as an environment of pure disclosure.
That's a great way to put it.
Because Siavash was so completely, authentically himself, so utterly unconcealed, the natural world, even the destructive force of the fire, simply had to let him pass through.
It is a profound resolution. But the play doesn't end with the cheering crowd and Siavash's victory. The author gives us an epilogue that takes place entirely outside of normal time.
Get post-credit scene for philosophers?
Pretty much. The fire has burned down to glowing embers, the crowds are gone, and our four main characters are just standing around the ashes, speaking to each other directly. They aren't speaking the language of the plot anymore. They are ruthlessly critiquing each other's foundational worldviews.
It is the ultimate philosophical reckoning. Siavash, having passed through the crucible of the fire, systematically addresses the fatal flaws in how the others approach human existence.
He takes them down one by one.
Yeah, he starts with Sudaba. He tells her that she completely misunderstood Nietzsche. She thought that being the Übermensch, the one who creates their own values, meant you had to dominate others.
Which is the classic misreading.
Right. Siavash points out that true self-creation should not mean treating someone else's existence as raw material for your own empowerment. A genuine will to power is about overcoming yourself, your own limitations. It shouldn't require victims.
He then turns his attention to his father, the Kierkegaardian king. Siavash acknowledges the sheer courage it took for Camus to make that agonizing leap of faith into the absurd. But he points out the tragedy of it.
It was an avoidable tragedy.
Exactly. Camus only had to make that terrible, costly leap because he had spent his entire life passively surfing the aesthetic stage. If the king had been deeply engaged and committed to his family and his kingdom earlier, he would have truly known the character of his son. The leave into the fire wouldn't have been necessary because the trust would have already been built.
Ooh. That's a hard truth. Finally, Siavash addresses Rustem, the Kantian champion. He respects Rustem's absolute, unwavering commitment to the universal moral law, but he gives him a stark warning. Rigid mathematical laws fail when they collide with real existing human beings.
People are messy.
Right. People live in messy, complicated, concrete situations. They do not live in an abstract, rational vacuum. When you prioritize the rule over the person, you lose the ability to actually dispense justice.
This systemic dismantling of the other views brings us to the ultimate synthesis of the play. Siavash delivers what is essentially a Heideggerian mic drop.
I love that.
He highlights the fundamental difference in their approaches. Kant asks the question, how should we act? Nietzsche asks, what should we will? And Kierkegaard asks, what should we commit to?
Those are all important questions, but Siavash points out that Heidegger asks the foundational question that has to precede all of them. What does it mean to be?
You cannot know how to act, what to desire, or what to believe until you first understand your own existence, carefully and attentively in the world you have been thrown into. Siavash's survival in the fire wasn't an argument he won. It was a mode of being he achieved.
So, what does this all mean for us? We've just taken this incredible journey through an ancient myth, completely rewired with the DNA of 4 distinct ways of looking at the human condition. We watched what happens when facts evaporate, reason paralyzes, and human systems for finding the truth completely collapse.
It really serves as a brilliant reminder that philosophy isn't just a collection of dusty books or abstract theories. It's the invisible architecture behind every major choice we make. It governs how we love, how we judge others, and ultimately how we face our own fires.
I want to leave you with a final provocative thought to chew on. Building right off the play's lingering question about truth and survival. Is innocence something that has to be proven, or is it something that simply is?
That's a heavy question.
Think about the modern world we're navigating right now. We live in an era that constantly demands we prove ourselves. You have to prove your competence at work, prove your moral purity in the court of public opinion, and prove your authenticity every single day through curated posts on social media.
The constant performance.
Right. But if true authenticity, the kind that allowed Siavash to walk through a roaring inferno untouched, is just a quiet, unshakable state of being, what happens when we constantly try to prove it? Does the relentless modern pressure to broadcast who we are actually force us to perform? And in performing for the crowd, are we destroying the very authenticity we are so desperate to show them?
That is the ultimate trap of the crowd. The moment you start performing your truth for an audience, you're no longer simply being. You've abandoned your own unshakable ground.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the flames. Keep questioning the narratives around you, keep looking for the hidden architecture in the stories we tell, and remember, sometimes the most powerful thing you can do when the world demands a performance is to turn into the open sky, stand your ground, and just be.